Imagine choosing to spend eternity in the most haunted place you ever investigated, surrounded by the very spirits you documented for decades, your final resting place becoming part of the phenomenon you devoted your life to understanding. Ed and Lorraine Warren, the most famous paranormal investigators in American history, made exactly that choice when they selected their burial plots at Stepney Cemetery in Monroe, Connecticut, a location they had monitored and studied throughout their entire careers. This is not a story about investigators who came, saw, and left. This is a story about two people who lived next door to the dead and ultimately joined them in the very ground they had walked countless nights, searching for proof of what lies beyond. Stepney Cemetery sits on a quiet hillside in Monroe, Connecticut, its oldest grave markers dating back to the colonial period, centuries before the town even had its current name. Generation after generation of Monroe residents were laid to rest in this earth, their lives and deaths accumulating in layers of memory and energy that soaked into the soil itself. The Warrens did not stumble upon this location by accident during some random investigation. They chose to live in Monroe specifically because of its concentration of paranormal activity, and Stepney Cemetery was among the very first sites that captured their sustained attention after they settled in the area. The cemetery adjoins Union Cemetery, another location the Warrens documented extensively in their 1992 book Graveyard, True Hauntings from an Old New England Cemetery, and the two sites share not only a physical boundary but overlapping paranormal phenomena that the Warrens observed and recorded across decades of patient, methodical work. The most famous phenomenon associated with both cemeteries is the White Lady, a luminous female apparition reported by dozens of independent witnesses stretching back to the early 20th century. Witnesses described her as a glowing figure in white clothing, sometimes appearing among the headstones, other times manifesting suddenly in the road before oncoming vehicles. Motorists who encountered her consistently reported the same terrifying experience, driving along the dark road bordering the cemeteries when suddenly a woman in white would appear directly in their path, solid and human in proportion, forcing them to slam on their brakes. In the instant their vehicle stopped, she would simply vanish. These were not people predisposed to believe in ghosts. These were everyday drivers, many of whom had no prior knowledge of the location's reputation, who found themselves face to face with something that should not exist. They described the encounter as qualitatively different from any trick of light or shadow they had ever experienced. This was a figure with apparent mass and solidity that occupied physical space one moment and simply ceased to exist the next. Ed Warren understood the value of systematic documentation. He did not simply collect ghost stories. He cross-referenced reports by location, time of year, weather conditions, and witness credibility, building a database of encounters that revealed consistent patterns impossible to explain through environmental factors or mass suggestion. Within the cemetery grounds themselves, Warren team members documented anomalous light phenomena that appeared on film and video, unexplained temperature drops in specific areas that registered on calibrated instruments, and on multiple occasions, figures observed among the headstones that could not be accounted for by any living person present at the scene. These were not vague shadows or ambiguous shapes. These were human forms witnessed by multiple observers simultaneously, appearing in locations where no physical person could have been standing. For the Warrens, investigating Stepney Cemetery was not a single case with a beginning and an end. It was a decades-long engagement that continued throughout their active careers, and for Lorraine, extended into her final years. Ed conducted countless nighttime vigils at the site, sometimes accompanied by NESBR team members, sometimes alone, accumulating a depth of personal experience with the location that he considered among the most significant of his entire life's work. He walked those grounds in every season, at every hour, in every kind of weather, developing an intimate familiarity with the site that went far beyond professional investigation. This was his neighborhood. These were his neighbors, living and dead. Lorraine Warren's psychic impressions of Stepney Cemetery remained remarkably consistent across her many visits, spanning different seasons and years. She described the site as containing layers of residual energy, the accumulated emotional imprints of countless lives and deaths, generation upon generation of grief and loss absorbed into the earth itself. But overlaying this residual background was something more specific and more powerful: the presence of the White Lady. Lorraine identified her not as a demonic entity or an inhuman intelligence, but as a human spirit, the surviving personality of a woman who had died under circumstances involving profound personal anguish. The White Lady was tethered to the cemetery and the surrounding roads by the emotional intensity of her final earthly experience, unable or unwilling to move forward to whatever awaited beyond. Lorraine characterized her with compassion rather than fear, seeing her as a soul in suspension, trapped between worlds by unresolved attachment. The clarity and consistency of these impressions, documented across multiple visits years apart, gave Ed confidence that what they were dealing with was an intelligent, individual presence rather than a mere environmental recording playing back endlessly. Ed Warren, trained in demonology and educated in Catholic theology, was always precise in his classifications. He distinguished clearly between different categories of phenomena at Stepney Cemetery. The residual layer, the environmental imprint of generations of human emotion, was benign in the sense that residual phenomena do not think, do not recognize the living, and do not make choices. They are recordings, nothing more. The White Lady occupied a different category entirely. She was what Warren classified as a true ghost in the theological sense, a discarnate human intelligence, not demonic, but not at rest, the surviving consciousness of a deceased individual. Warren regarded such cases with deep compassion. These were not his enemies. They were souls in need. But there was a third category of presence at Stepney Cemetery, documented occasionally by Warren team members and independent witnesses alike. In certain areas of the grounds, investigators reported a different quality of awareness, something that felt distinctly less human. This was not the gentle sadness of residual grief or the lonely attachment of a trapped spirit. This was a cold, watching intelligence that Warren associated with the category of inhuman entities he had confronted throughout his career. He documented these observations with the same systematic rigor he applied to every case, noting specific locations, weather conditions, and the spiritual state of the witnesses. Where human spirits required compassion, inhuman intelligences required confrontation. The spiritual approach the Warrens brought to Stepney Cemetery was one of sustained witness rather than single intervention. The White Lady, as a trapped human spirit, was not an entity requiring violent expulsion, but a soul the Warrens believed might be helped through prayer and spiritual attention. Lorraine prayed at the cemetery regularly with the intention of assisting this spirit toward whatever passage awaited her. Ed participated in blessings of the grounds conducted by clergy who shared their theological understanding. For the darker presences occasionally identified within the cemetery, Ed employed protective and expulsive prayers from Catholic tradition, working to deny those entities any foothold in the location. The ongoing nature of the Stepney investigation reflected Warren's understanding that some spiritually active locations require maintenance rather than resolution. Sites where historical accumulation of energy demands sustained spiritual attention across years and decades. In August 2006, Ed Warren passed away. He was laid to rest at Stepney Cemetery. In April 2019, Lorraine Warren followed him. She was interred beside her husband in the ground they had walked together for decades, monitoring and documenting the phenomena that continued around them. That two of the most significant paranormal investigators of the 20th century chose to be buried in the most spiritually active location they had personally studied strikes those who knew them as profoundly characteristic. It was a final act of commitment to the work that had defined their lives, and perhaps, as some have suggested, a final investigation of a different kind. The White Lady continues to be reported near both Stepney and Union Cemetery by witnesses who have no knowledge of the Warren connection to the site. The Warren grave itself has become a destination for those wishing to pay respects, and more than a few visitors have reported strange experiences in the vicinity of their headstone. Ed and Lorraine Warren now rest within the site they documented for decades, surrounded by whatever presences they spent their lives studying in the Connecticut soil that was always home. Hashtags: Paranormal Investigation, Ed and Lorraine Warren Haunted Cemetery, True Paranormal Real Ghosts, White Lady Host Connecticut Hauntings, Ghost Stories, Paranormal Activity, Haunted Places, Supernatural Stories, Warren's Cemetery Host, Paranormal Documentary Scar Stories. This story was created with AI assistance based on documented paranormal case files. All events reference real investigations by Ed and Lorraine Warren.